Talk to her. Hold on.
Welcome to the Delta World Weavers under the chairmanship of Marianne Ferranti and the South Coast Storytellers Guild with Chairman Betsy Mosier. This is the 30th celebration for the South Coast Storytellers, the Guild, and the 27th celebration for Delta World Weavers. We welcome Ron Evans, a member of the Inland Valley Storytellers who attended the very first celebration held in Connecticut, where Paw Pinkerton was in charge. And we ask him to tell us about and give a short history about Tellabration. Ron Evans.
Thank you very much. The name J.G. Pinkerton, better known as Paw Pinkerton of Stamford, Connecticut, may be indeed known by some of us. He was a beatific-faced, oversized rascal and a sly teller of tall tales who could charm birds out of their nests, talk squirrels out of bird feeders, and bakers into serving huge slices of his favorite kind of pie. He was a storyteller's storyteller by any measure. Now, like all of us, he loved good stories, well told. Like some of us, he told good stories well. And like a few of us, he made storytelling a household word and crafted, well, how should we say it, positive lies into gospel truths. But alas, like none of us. In 1988, he created the worldwide event we celebrate tonight, Tellabration, Tellabration, Tellabration. It wasn't as large then. There were only 40 people. By happy accident, Janet and I were invited to that first occasion, and with some 40 other people gathered in the beautifully appointed New Canaan, Connecticut library, and just basked in a happy memory of it ever since. It was a remarkable and wonderful evening. It was no accident, of course, that the event was in a library. I mean, where else other than in schools worthy of the name are stories and storytelling so well and continually honored and practiced, of course. Well, Paw Pinkerton knew good storytelling, and he knew a lot about the oral tradition, and he promoted himself only as a storyteller because he wanted other people to remember the stories even more than his larger than life, in every sense of the term, self. He also knew that the oral tradition, of which we are all a part, to be the most ancient of all of the arts, and even predates a written Bible, of course, are not the words later written down of that telling, and God said, "Let there be light." Very first beginning of a story, a cosmic once upon a time, I suppose, a story of eternity begun. But tonight, all together here and around the world, we add a few more spoken lines in between that magic phrase of beginning and the never-ending part that is, and all happily lived forever and forever and forever after. It was a great time, and every time in between since, I'm sure, honors him, and he'd be proud of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Tellabration, the worldwide event of storytelling, at this very moment across 6 continents, in 40 states and 9 countries, from Sacramento to Savannah, Boise to Barcelona, West Virginia to the West Indies, India to California. Over 300 audiences are gathered for this spectacular storytelling event. Without delay, enjoy, and in anticipation, let the stories begin. Our first storyteller is Larry. Larry learned trick roping, also known as cowboy rope spinning, in 1990 with the intention of performing. To fill out his show and add variety, Larry decided to add storytelling in the form of tales from the Old West. This led to a decades-long journey of uncovering true tales of the Wild West. Larry began his performing career in 1980 as a professional juggler. He's performed over 2,000 juggling shows and taught over 100,000 people to juggle. Larry tells stories almost exclusively of the Old West and the American frontier. Most are adapted from true stories. Tonight, Larry has two stories, one during the gold rush following the Civil War, and one from old California.
Yeah, it's
Adapted
about
from a true post-Civil War story, The Hairy Howitzer explains how a creative United States Army major devises a new way to shoot cannons with an unexpected result. Something about a mule. And Ben Thorne and his special secret weapon is adapted from a true story from 1861. California Sheriff Ben Thorne deploys a unique weapon to deal with a prisoner who threatens his life. Center stage is yours, Larry.
Thank you. Okay, let me stand up and move back a little bit. I'm ready. As a major in the United States Army, stationed at a fort in Northern California following the Civil War, I have many duties. I have figured that one of my duties is to try and find a solution to a problem we have of using cannons against the Indians. Different types of cannons have been used by the US Army throughout the 1800s. Classified by their trajectory, there are guns with a low trajectory, howitzers with a medium trajectory, and mortars with a high trajectory. And each one is very effective when used in the proper situation against traditional armies. Against the Indians, they're not effective. The Indians don't stay in one place. By the time those heavy cannons are set up, loaded, aimed, and the fuse lit, the Indians, who fight from horseback, have moved off and are someplace else on the battlefield. I figured that somehow I might be able to come up with a solution to this problem. One day, while I was working with a small mountain howitzer, an idea came to me. These small howitzers are designed to be broken down so they can be packed by mule over mountains to level spots from where they can be used in battle. Just as I was taking the barrel off the base and loading it onto the mule, the idea hit me. What if we forgot about that base, and attached the barrel to the mule in a manner that could be fired right off the animal's back? Using cannons against the Indians would be much more effective. Excited about my idea, I rushed back to the fort to share it with the post commander. After scratching his beard for a while, he said, "Okay, first let's try it out before we use it in battle." The very next morning, I attached the barrel of a howitzer to the back of a mule, and with the muzzle facing off the animal's backside, I led him to a bluff overlooking a target in the middle of the river. The rear of the mule was facing the target as I backed him up gently to the edge of the bluff. The post commander and a number of other officers were standing in a semicircle as I stepped up and placed a timed fuse in the touch hole of the howitzer. When the fuse was set, I lit it and stepped back towards the other officers. Now, up to this time, the mule had been handling this without a fuss, but now he was getting a little edgy. It could have been a number of reasons: the unfamiliar weight of the heavy howitzer, the steep drop off at its rear, the hissing of the lighted fuse, or a combination of them, or something else. Whatever it was, he was definitely uneasy. He turned his head around to try and figure out what was going on. And as he did so, his back turned and the howitzer began to sweep the horizon. That mule was getting excited and his curiosity was growing more and more intense. In a couple seconds, he was standing with his forelegs in a bunch, making 6 revolutions a minute as he chased his tail. The post commander took refuge behind a nearby tree while the junior officers slid down the bluff into the river, disregarding all possible damage to their high-priced uniforms. The adjutant, the commander's assistant, ran for the fort as I hit the ground, probably with a loud thud. In 2 minutes, there was a puff of smoke and a dull thud as the mule went somersaulting over the bluff. The poor animal landed in the river, anchored to the riverbed by the heavy howitzer. Meanwhile, the cannonball barreled towards the fort, hitting the chimney on my residence, rattling adobe bricks down into the parlor and frightening my wife half to death. The mule was rescued, and the other officers dusted off the cannon and put it back into storage. I don't believe the post commander ever filed a report of this incident with the War Department. I am thankful for that. It was enough to be embarrassed in front of my whole fort. It would have been another thing to be embarrassed in front of the whole country. I adapted this story, the one I just told, from an article in a newspaper from 1874, the Grass Valley Union from Grass Valley, California. It apparently describes an actual military experiment, not a hoax. The names of the officers were omitted, apparently to protect the guilty. Thank you. And now, my second story. Thank you, I see Marion applauding. My second story is also a true story. It happened about 10 or 12 years earlier than my previous story. And also from California. Ben Thorne came to California in 1849 as a 20-year-old looking for gold. He told his friends, "I'll find lots of gold and be set for life." Didn't quite work out that way, but it wasn't because of lack of hard work on Ben's part. He worked very hard. And when he didn't find gold in one mining camp, he moved on to another and another. In those early days of the California gold rush, there was lots of crime with little attempt at law enforcement. Ben saw lots of crime and he was disgusted by it. He thought, there's got to be some way to bring law and order to this state. So in 1855, Ben Thorne became a law officer in Calaveras County. It was a long and dangerous process, but he learned. In March of 1861, Sheriff Ben Thorne had in his jail a prisoner named Jesus Villalobos, who had been convicted of murdering a man who had tried to arrest him for a horse theft in the town of Jenny Lind. He had been sentenced to death, but his conviction was up for appeal to the California Supreme Court. When that conviction was upheld, he was scheduled to be hanged on March 19th of 1861. 4 days before his execution date, at the request of his mother, he was taken out of jail to a daguerreotype gallery to be photographed. Photography was pretty new back then, and daguerreotype was one of its early forms. Since photography was new, people generally didn't have photos of their loved ones. So it was a common practice for someone to have a photo taken of their recently deceased, or in this case, soon to be deceased loved one. So they had an image by which to remember them. A man of huge size and strength, Villalobos was escorted to the gallery by Sheriff Thorne and another officer. As his head was being positioned in the brace that would hold it motionless for the 30 seconds necessary to expose the film, Sheriff Thorne couldn't help thinking about that rope that would hold that head motionless in just 4 days. On the way back to the jail, the other officer said he had forgotten something at the gallery, and he left Sheriff Thorne alone with the prisoner. They continued, with Thorne keeping Villalobos 8 feet ahead of him. As they neared the jail, Villalobos whirled about, crouched low, and charged Sheriff Thorne. He grabbed the sheriff in a bear hug and pulled his pistol from his holster. Thorne grabbed the hand with the pistol and the two men struggled for control of the weapon, but Villalobos pulled his hand away. Sheriff Thorne had been in some tight situations before, but he knew this could be his last. Gathering all his strength, he threw Villalobos to the ground and jumped on top of him. but Villalobos was able to cock his pistol and jam the barrel into the sheriff's belly. With lightning speed of mind and body, Thorne hit the pistol aside with his left hand and rammed the forefinger of his right hand as far up the nostril as it would go. Ah! It caused such intense and excruciating pain that Villalobos loosened his grip and dropped the pistol. Help, help, yelled Sheriff Thorne. He hit the pistol aside and held the outlaw securely until friends could come and help him escort his prisoner back to jail, where Villalobos showed great remorse and apologized profusely to Sheriff Thorne. Villalobos' lawyers had been working very hard to save him, and 2 days later, they were successful. They secured a reprieve for him from the governor. His sentence was commuted to life in prison. Ben Thorne continued as sheriff and was known as one of the best lawmen in the country. He brought law and order to Calaveras County and served for nearly 50 years. But in early April of 1861, he had one more duty associated with this case. Sheriff Ben Thorne escorted Jesus Villalobos to San Quentin to serve out his sentence, this time being much more careful and remembering his special secret weapon. Thank you.
Larry roping his stories together. And now from Delta Word Weavers, we have Ben Tucker. Ben Tucker tried out for the 1964 Tokyo Olympics in track and field. But he'll keep that story for another time, I think. He enjoys telling personal, historical, and folktale stories. And as a child, Ben always enjoyed singing and stories. All the men in his family were great storytellers and would spin tales at family reunions. Ben is carrying on the traditions in this story. Mary Ellen Pleasant, the Harriet Thurman and Rosa Parks of California.
John Brown's body lies a molding in the grave. John Brown's body lies a molding in the grave. John Brown's body lies a molding in the grave, and his soul is marching on. When John Brown raided the fort at Harper's Ferry and tried to steal the guns for a slave rebellion in 1859, he was hanged and the rebellion was unsuccessful. When they cut him down from that tree, they found in his pocket a note that read, "The axe is at the tree, the foot of the tree, and when the first blow is struck, there will be more money where this came from." And it was signed M.E.P. Those initials stood for Mary Ellen Pleasant. Now, who was Mary Ellen Pleasant? I'll tell you who she was, because I was a conductor on her Underground Railroad. Mary Pleasant was many things to many people. First and foremost, she was a millionaire in the gold rush days of California in the 1850s, 60s, and 70s. And she was also an abolitionist, a powerful, powerful abolitionist. And she was a civil rights activist. She was a Black woman who was born into slavery, sold into indentured servitude, and she ended up being one of the richest people in the country. Now, let me tell you a little something about her. Nobody rightly knows when she was born. Some folks say 1814, some folks say 1817. Now her tombstone up there in Napa says 1817, so I'm going with that. Now, her mother was a pure-blooded African woman, dark-skinned, blue-black, born in New Orleans, and they say she was a voodoo priestess. Now, as far as her daddy was concerned, a little confusion around that. Some folks say her daddy was a Hawaiian sailor that settled down in New Orleans, and other folks say her daddy was the youngest son of the governor of Virginia. But she was a mixed blood woman and could easily pass for white. Nobody knows where she was born, either Louisiana, Georgia, or Philadelphia. But such was the way of bondage in those days. Nobody really had no papers. But Miss Mary Ellen was sold to a group of Quakers that come through Louisiana. And they wanted somebody who could read and write and was sharp of mind to work in their dry goods store in Nantucket. So they took her up north and they promised her mama that if she worked hard, she could buy her way to freedom. And people, that's exactly what Mary Ellen did. She was a quick study. She worked in the dry goods store, did all the inventory, ordered the goods, and she ran that great big old household. They had a huge mansion. And those Quakers happened to be abolitionists too. And so they would have big fundraisers in the big house, and Mary Ellen would serve the folks, and she had a chance to mix and mingle with them. Growing up, she met people like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and John Brown, and she listened and she learned. And the family took a liking to her because she was sharp and she kept the household running and she made money for the business. Now, Mary Ellen never really went to school. She was self-taught. And she told everybody, I don't read books, I read people. And Mary Ellen bought her freedom when she was 16 years old. And the family adopted her as one of their own. And they introduced her to another mulatto, half black, who was also passing for white. He owned a plantation and he freed all the slaves. And he was a wealthy flour merchant, had big money, but he was also an abolitionist. And when he and Mary Ellen married, they got into the business of raiding plantations and freeing slaves. They did that for 4 years. They ran through Virginia, Louisiana, and Mississippi, and they freed hundreds of slaves. Now, one day on one of them raids, her husband, James Smith, was killed. My daddy was also on that raid. And that's when Miss Mary Ellen took me under her wings. And that's when the paddy rollers, the slave owners, put a big price on her head. And we had to hightail it down to New Orleans and lay low. Now, Mary Ellen's husband, he was also related to Madame Laveau, the voodoo queen of New Orleans. She put a spell on you. She had a mojo working in a black cat bone. You wouldn't mess with her because you'd never find your way home. Now, her husband had left her a lot of money, and he told her upon his death, she was to keep going into slave country and liberate black folks. And if she ever got in trouble, go on down to New Orleans and stay with Madame Laveau, and she could tell her which way to go. So she went down there, hung out in New Orleans, Me and her and Madame LeBeau would spend a lot of time together. Then they'd go out in the woods and they would be picking different herbs and different roots. And she showed her how to work roots. And then she told us, she said, Mary Ellen, it's time for you to get up out of here. Something tell me your fortune is out in California in gold rush country. There's money to be made out there. And I got some contacts. I know a fella by the name of Thomas Bell. You take your money and go put it out there in his bank. It's called the Bank of California. And we set sail in 1852 for San Francisco. And we landed there on Embarcadero. And people, it was a rough, muddy place. It was sure enough wild, wild west. There was a lot of money out there and everything, but it was rough. And Miss Mary Ellen got us a job in a high-class men's boarding room. And she commenced to cooking and everything down there. And she bought them herbs and she introduced Creole cooking to San Francisco. Catfish and crawfish, etouffee, jambalaya and gumbo. And people started to love it. And that won them over. Mary Ellen won their hearts and their minds. And while she was working there, she would listen to the conversations of the gold miners and the city leaders. And she was doing what they call ear hustling. And she found out about all those big business deals that they had going. And she took her money down to Thomas Bell at that California bank. And she said, I come here because Madame LeBeau told me that you could work with me and help me make money on my inheritance. And he knew right away, any friend of Madame LeBeau is a friend of mine. And people, let me tell you, she would listen every day to the conversations of them big shots. And Thomas invested her money and she started making money and she bought property and she bought a great big old house over there on Washington Street, right near the Embarcadero. And she put up this beautiful boarding house. Even the governor of California stayed there and he was inaugurated in there. And then she started buying dairy farms up there in Sonoma County and bought some wineries. And Thomas Bell's name was on everything because couldn't no woman, black or white, own any property. And they had a gentleman's agreement, if you will. And he trusted her totally. And so in 1865, she had been passing for white all those years. But in 1865, at the end of the Civil War and Emancipation Proclamation, Miss Mary Ellen said, I'm coming out. I don't have to pass for white no more because I'm free. I can drop the mask of whiteness. And people, let me tell you, when she did that, that's when the knives came out. White folks couldn't stand the fact that they saw this woman who they thought was white. Now, all of a sudden, she go down to City Hall and change her race from black to white, and they felt that they had been duped. And they tried to bring her down. They quit calling her Miss Mary Ellen Pleasant. They called her Mammy Pleasant. They called her the Voodoo Queen and said she was putting a spell on people and taking advantage of them. But you know what? Miss Mary Ellen didn't care. Now the black folks, they know she was black. The white folks thought she was white. So she was what we call changeable. She's like one of them, what to call them animals there, they're out there in the tropics and they can change their color, a camellia. She was like a camellia. So she kept on accumulating property and she was bringing the slaves out of New Orleans and things was going good. Now, she was going to work one day with two of her employees, they was black, and they got on the trolley and the trolley conductor come up to the two women that was with her, and they said, you gals got to get off this here trolley. This trolley is for whites only. And Miss Mary Ellen objected. You can't put them off. And he said, ma'am, you can stay. But those darkies, they got to go. And Miss Mary Ellen looked at him and said, young man, I have you know I am black. And he said, what? He said, well, all of y'all get your black asses off this here trolley. And as they was walking, he said, another thing, what the hell you doing looking so white? And she looked at him and said, ask your pappy, and stormed off the trolley. And she told her employees, y'all going to work, ladies. Where you going, Miss Mary Ellen? I'm going down to see my attorney, Bernie. We're gonna sue their asses. And that's exactly what she did. She took her money and she sued the Trolley Car Company of San Francisco. It took her 2 years. Went all the way up to the California Supreme Court. But she won. And that way, in 1868, black folks and other non-white folks could ride the trolley. Folks, this was almost 100 years before Rosa Parks. How about that? Now, in 1875, they were still coming at her, calling her Mammy Pleasant, Voodoo Queen. You should have seen the cartoons, clownish stuff, making her look like a caricature, a buffoon, but she didn't care. She kept on accumulating the wealth. Her and Thomas Bell, they were a financial team. In 1875, Mary Ellen Pleasant was worth $30 million. But then the world started to turn. 1892, her business partner, Thomas Bell, fell down a flight of steps and broke his neck. Now, he was married to a woman named Teresa Bell, and she was terribly jealous, insanely jealous of Miss Mary Ellen. And what she did, she saw an opportunity and she took it. She went to the courthouse and said that Mary Ellen had put a spell on her husband, and she had no rights to his property, nor did she have a right to that great big old mansion that she had built. She had built a huge mansion on Octavia and Bush Street, 30 rooms. And what she did is she sued. Took her a number of years, but in 1899, the courthouses ruled against her and they evicted her out of her house. Took her down, folks. And that was an unkindly blow that she couldn't really take. And she went downhill after that. Now, she had set me up in a restaurant and in the hotel business, and financed it for me. And word got to me that Miss Mary Ellen was low sick. So I went up to see her in Napa. Never will forget, it was January 4th, 1904. She was barely conscious. I told her who I was, and she said, I want to hold your hand. Her hand was warm. And we talked a little while about the old days. And I said, Miss Mary, let me ask you a question. Do you ever regret coming out black when you could have passed for white and nobody would have bothered you? She said, preacher, that's what you call me. I was born black. I was going to die black. In order for me to be free, I had to be me. And then she laid back and started humming and singing. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. My spirit will march on. And with that, she closed her eyes never opened them again, and drew her last breath. And in that instant, her hand went from warm to cold, and she died. Now, folks, this woman's name needs to be in the history books because she was a millionaire, she was a civil rights leader, and she was a powerful abolitionist. But history has ignored her. She's an untold, unknown shero. Now, if you ever find yourself in San Francisco, make your way up to Bush and Octavia Street and walk that block down Octavia from Bush to Sutter. You're gonna see 6 great big old eucalyptus trees that she planted over 100 years ago. I go out there sometime myself. You stand up under one of them trees late at night on a cold San Francisco night, and you just might hear her in those breezes singing, "Her spirit marches on." Miss Mary Ellen Pleasant.
Ben Tucker, putting the spell on us and drawing us into his story. Just a wonderful story, Ben. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The South Coast Storytellers Guild has a very important storyteller, and his name is David Whiting. David says, books got me interested in telling stories. As a boy, and sometimes as an adult, I could not resist acting out scenes from the books that I loved. And I had a lot of fun. This is a story of how not to plan a Christmas vacation journey by train for your girlfriend, her pet rat, and her rat-like ex-boyfriend. David Whiting with Stowaways.
We weren't stowaways on the way down from college. Connie, who was my first real relationship, had met me up in Berkeley. She was a biologist and an aspiring geneticist. We learned a lot about each other. I learned about different ways to breed rats of all kinds of temperaments and colors. Her goal was to breed a pink-eyed rat that was actually had eyes bordering on red, but had black fur. Very difficult because pink-eyed rats usually go with albino or white fur. She called this her Satan rat project, and the closest she'd come to her devil rat was little Sydney, who I got to know quite well because she kept all of her rats in a complex of cages in the room in the co-op where we lived together. Sydney had pink eyes, but brown to black fur, and she took her down on the train, hidden in one of her voluminous pockets, of course, because you may frown on rats on the trains. We weren't sure about this. Came down to meet my mother, but also so Connie could attend the Southern California Fancy Rat Convention. Bet you didn't know there was a Southern California Fancy Rat Convention. Well, we traveled down on Amtrak. We were coming down in the days before the train track went all the way down to Fullerton. So we had to take our leave of the train north of the Grapevine Mountains and take a bus that was provided for us down to Los Angeles and take the rest of the way down to Fullerton. We had a not too nervous Christmas together because my mom and Connie were both very gentle people, both very considerate people. Christmas and the vacation passed altogether too soon. Connie exchanged information, no new rats at the convention. I was a little surprised by this. And so it was soon time to go back to our studies. Well, my studies and Connie's studies. I don't think Sydney had much to study except how to stay inside a concealed pocket. As we got back on the Amtrak, now this is my second train trip. The first train trip I'd ever taken that was that long. Second train trip I'd taken that was that long had been the 500 miles down from college. And so I had to remember the drill, getting onto the bus, exchanging the plane ticket for the voucher that we used to take the bus up to where the train would take us the rest of the way. We got settled in. convinced Sydney not to say too much because Sydney tended to be a rather opinionated little rat. And we were settled in. And during the time I worried about Sydney, I learned that I had not thought to think about another important matter, which was my own ticket. I looked in every pocket I had. I looked through my luggage, and I waited for the conductor to come down the aisle and find me with no ticket. I was 20 years old. As I say, I had not traveled on long train rides very much. I didn't know what they did to you if you didn't have a ticket. I didn't know if they threw you off the train. It was actually snow outside. This is not something a Fullerton boy was used to. So, knowing that my girl was watching me and knowing that I had to stand up, be an adult about the situation, I did the first thing that occurred to me to do, and I went and I hid in the men's room until I knew that that conductor was gone. And I didn't know when the conductor would be gone. So I waited. And I waited. I watched the trees go past out the window from where I was. And then I heard, David, did you fall in? He's gone, right? He's gone, yes. So out I came, looking as brave and heroic as I could under the situation. And we decided to have some lunch over the dining car. We're going to feed little treats to Sydney while we were there. So we got to get a little spot in the corner of the dining car too. And that's when we noticed that we were not the only Berkeley students on this train heading north. Not only that, we were not the only Berkeley biology students heading north on this train, because getting up from a seat about 3 rows ahead of us and greeting Connie with a big smile was somebody I knew only slightly, but Connie knew very well. Her ex-lab partner, member of the tennis team, about 6 feet taller than me, 6 inches taller than me. Her ex-boyfriend, Todd, all alone, looking inappropriately at Connie. I thought, hello, Todd? We're off to get something to eat. Well, Todd chatted Connie up, chatted me up, said Sydney. I don't think Sydney liked Todd very much, but we had to put Sydney back inside the pocket, and we all came up to the dining car for what was not as fun a lunch as I thought it might be. And Todd wanted to talk to Connie about the old days of 6 months ago when they had been together. And Connie did not want to talk about this, not in front of me, not ever. Connie had mentioned that Todd had been a little possessive before, and she began to shrink in a little on herself as Todd began to talk more about his new lab partner, more about his tennis trophies, and more about their old times together. And I was beginning to interject myself, try to get us onto a new topic, but that's when Connie took charge. She's a grown woman. She knew how to stand a situation like this right in the face and bravely go to the ladies' room and hide. Apparently, I'd inspired her, said Sydney, as they all went down out of the car. And before too soon, Todd and I discussed tennis, which I knew a little bit about. And before long, he worked the conversation around what a very long time Connie seemed to be taking in getting back. This was in the days before smartphones. I had no way of letting her know that it was still here at the table waiting for Connie's return. But eventually, Todd decided to go look for her. I had a good guess where Connie might be. And so eventually I was able to knock on the door. Is he gone? Connie said. And I took her back to our seat together with Sydney in tow. We'd been able to sneak Sydney some food. And we were just about to get back to our seat. And I was getting a little bit tired of the drama of getting up and down and trying to escape from this person and that person. And so I didn't notice until it was almost too late that the conductor was coming down the aisle, this time from the other direction. And he was checking tickets. So 45 minutes later, I was sitting in the men's room, and Connie was knocking on the door, letting me know that he was gone now. Is Todd gone too? Yes, he is. And so she and I went to the dining car again, figured the conductor wouldn't bother us too much there, figured Todd's stomach had to be full by then. So now we learned what to do when you're stuck on an Amtrak 500-mile train route without a ticket. We came back, doors opened up at the west side of Berkeley. We were very footsore by now, and we were able to carry our books back to our co-op and rested down in a bed that Connie let me sleep in on her level of the co-op that we both shared. We both lived in Barrington Hall at the time. It's how we met. And it was, I think only this January the 2nd, when I opened my eyes the next day, thinking about how soon it would have to be till I got ready for my first class. And I began to hear what I thought was birdsong, singing of little birds. Hadn't heard them in this room very often or in this building very often. So it took me a while to rub my eyes, and he realized the sound was coming from the rat cage, said Sydney, said her 8 new children. Sydney had apparently become with children. And in addition to a gift of our adventure together and the gift of the Southern California Fancy Rat Convention, we also had the gift of 8 new little baby Sydneys. None of them Satan rats, unfortunately, which is probably just as well. Otherwise, it might have spoiled the effect as they yipped out Christmas carols to us at the end of our Christmas vacation. And that is the story of the time where I was a stowaway, where Sydney was a stowaway. Connie might as well have been a stowaway, given that we kept having to hide in the restroom. Madam MC, fellow storytellers, a tale of our old time railroad travels way back in 1987.
Thank you, Dave. Well, you never know what you're going to get when you have a ticket to ride. Our next storyteller is also a South Coast Storyteller Guild storyteller. His name is Dave Chittenden. He was trained as an engineer, but in retirement, he's been telling stories ever since he joined Toastmasters and the South Coast Storytellers Guild in 1989. He often tells stories in the first person. However, do not assume that these stories are true. They live independently now, and he takes no responsibility for their actions. Dave Chittenden, in a probably true story called My Father's Red Convertible. Dave, you're muted. Dave, you're muted.
I can count on the fingers of one hand the number of times my father ever took me somewhere, anywhere, just me, somewhere, anywhere. The first time he took me somewhere, it was down to his shop on 63rd Street in Chicago. I don't remember the shop at all, but we went out to lunch afterwards at a Chinese restaurant, and I liked the food. I had never been to a Chinese restaurant, and I've always liked the food since then. The second time he took me out, it was to his shop again, but this time we went out to a restaurant that served Finn and Hattie. I didn't know what Finn and Hattie was. In fact, I didn't know what it was until recently when I looked it up in the dictionary. Turns out Finn and Hattie is a highly smoked haddock fish. Its taste was strong. I was able to eat it, but I have no desire to have it again. But you should try it. It would be an experience for you to have Finn and Hattie. The third time my father took me somewhere, we went to see the Chicago White Sox play baseball down on 35th Street in Chicago. Now, when Comiskey Park was built, most people did not have cars, so there was no provision for parking at Comiskey Park at all. You parked on the street, and you were lucky to find a place. Well, you went down with my father, myself, and my father's friend, Stanley Valentine. And when we got parked, suddenly the car was surrounded by a group of small boys. I didn't know what was going on, but Stanley Valentine was prepared. He reached into his pocket and he brought out a fistful of coins, mostly pennies, I think. And he threw them out over the sidewalk. And he said, "Boys, you can keep all that money just for watching our car while we're gone." Well, because of this history, I was a little surprised when I was away at the university and my father called me up. He said, "Do you want a car? I found a car for you. Do you want a car? It's only $400. Well, you know, I had never had a car. I had always gone wherever I wanted by train. And I thought maybe it's time. Maybe it's time that I should have a car. So I said, "Well, what kind of a car is it?" And my father said, "It's a 1956 red Ford convertible." Wow, a red convertible. My father said, "It's only $400. Do you have the money?" Well, actually, I did have the money. So I said, "I'll come down to Chicago on the train and pick up my car." And that's what I did. I got down there to Chicago, and there was that red convertible, and it was really red, flaming red, fire engine red. Ooh, was that car red? And the top was black cotton, so perfect, so very perfect. And I didn't realize that paint doesn't last that well in the sun, and cotton doesn't last very well either. That car had been newly painted, and it had had a new top put on it also. Must have cost my father more than $400. Well, I wondered for a long time, for many years, what was going on there? How did that happen? And I've come to realize that that was my father's red convertible. You know, when my father was young, when he was in his 20s, and at the time when he really needed a red convertible, it was a depression time, and there was no money. There was no possibility that he could ever have a red convertible. But now, in 1960, he had the money. Now he could buy one, but my mother would never have agreed to that. So my father bought it for me. I've come to realize that I was just the driver of my father's red convertible.
Dreams and memories and riding topless through the country. Thank you, Dave. Well, tonight's celebration is presented in cooperation with the Storytelling Association in California and the National Storytelling Network, and is coordinated by Betsy Mosier, Chair of the South Coast Storytellers Guild, and Marian Ferranti, Chair of the Delta Word Weavers. If you would like to make a donation to the National Storytelling Network, who originated this event in 1988 and promoted it to its international status, go to story.org/donate. And after you've entered your amount, scroll down to "If you would like your donation designated" for a menu to click on the SAC Celebration. And Marianne is going to give us the address on our screen at the moment. And Marianne, that is to storynet.org/donate. And if you'd like to say something at the moment, you may unmute yourself and give your accolades to our storytellers so far this evening.
Fun evening so far.
Nicely done. Great variety, folks. well told, kept our interest, and some of them are very funny. They're all just excellent, really excellent.
An enjoyable evening of bedtime stories.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. At this point, we have 53 people in attendance right now, so that's wonderful. I say that's a library full of people. Used to go to the library like last year included for Telebration, but of course, this is the first time for all of us on the Zoom time. So it's actually nice to have a tool to utilize during these difficult, strange times. But thank you all for coming. That's great. So we're going to take about a 2-minute break and you just keep chatting a bit, and we'll resume in about down to 1 minute now. Yeah, go take a break, get a drink of water if you want.
Or something else. Maybe a cup of coffee.
Cup of coffee.
I don't know if I'm chatting. Am I?
Yes.
Yes, you are, Thelma. Hi, Thelma.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm not sure even if I can get a video on there, but I'm having so much fun. I've got Zoom and this is great.
Oh, good. Now figure out how to get your video on, but your sound's on. That's good.
Yeah.
Making progress.
I'll work on that next time. One thing at a
Okay.
time.
I'll help you on a different day.
You share your screen and then you get it on. But I think Marianne will help you with that.
Yeah. Any comments from new listeners? I won't call on you by name, but you're welcome to speak up, friends.
The Very Pleasant story is really a great one. Several years ago, I read many books on her and Thomas Bell and the different people in San Francisco, Ralston's Ring, and so on. But of all the people, Very Pleasant is one of the most interesting. This is Joy Swift. I didn't
Hi, Joy
expect
Swift.
to be on, so I don't have my picture on.
Joyce Swift is from South Bay Storytellers, and their storytelling is Saturday night. She's here, and I think Lori Pines are here. The orange banner behind me was given to me by Joy Swift from the South Bay Storytellers. They utilized that banner for about 10 years, and then they decided to pass it on, and Delta Word Weavers got it. So I've been using it for 10 years, and I even figured out how to put it on Zoom. Good. Thank you for your banner. I've really been enjoying it. It's felt and it's handmade.
Yes, I made it.
You made it. Oh, okay.
I
Well,
made it,
I certainly
yes.
have appreciated it. Thank you.
We used to hang it from a tree.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Deb Downer. I just wanted to ask, are tonight's stories true stories or mixtures of fantasy and truth, or how is the format?
They're mostly true, like the historical stories are true. And then some of the others you were told at the beginning, they're based on fact, and you decide where the fiction goes off of it.
And as a storyteller, it's for me to know. Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. There's truth in them, all of them. A
Yeah.
lot of truth.
Yeah, and the ones after our break are mostly true.
Mhm.
I see who's coming up. Yeah, they're absolutely mostly true, if not all.
Nothing but the truth.
Okay, is everybody back from getting their cup of coffee?
Let the stories continue. And we will be recording from now on. After the Civil War, the United States had, first of all, Marcelina de Galida's love for story comes from a rich history of her family and guests bringing their stories to tell during and after meals. Her favorite stories are of family, Oakland history, and politics. Marcelina also enjoys classic, culturally focused tales. She's a retired counselor, an avid reader, lover of storytelling, a professional, and loves to hear an interesting story. Tonight, Marcelina tells us that Mamacita's table has been in her family in Oakland, California for over 70 years. It's been a place for our family's spiritual, physical, and social connections, she says. What stories will it tell tonight?
Hello. Well, the first time I remember that the table came into play, I was about 4 years old, 1948. And I lived with my mother and father and my sister Tina in a Victorian flat that was right next door to where my Mamacita and Papacito, that's what we call my grandparents, lived. So I remember waking up and getting ready and saying, Mom, can I go now? Can I go next door now? She said, oh, well, okay, go ahead, but don't be a pest. All right, I won't. I ran out the back door, across the driveway over to Mamacita and Papacito's house. And as I came up the back, oh boy, I could smell something really good, really good. What was it? Oh, it was tortillas. I'm lucky today. Maybe there's going to be some tortillas being made. I ran up the stairs, opened the screen door. Buenos dias, everybody. And everybody said, Buenos dias, Marcy. Mamacita was there. She was at this table, on the front of the table, working really hard. There was a great big bowl full of little round balls of dough. She would take one out and she would throw it down and roll out a perfectly round tortilla. Then she would turn around and throw it on the grill, turn the other ones over, pull one down and put it down on this big stack of about a 2-foot stack of tortillas. Oh my goodness, she was a whirl and a production person right away. I was fascinated by her. Across the table were 3 men who had had been sent up from Mexico to the Southern Pacific Railway, and they were working there, and they were boarders. So they were having their breakfast and finishing up and getting ready to go to work. I was watching them, and after they left, Mamacita came up and said, Mija, here. She was giving me a hot off the grill tortilla slathered with butter. Oh my goodness. I don't think I'll ever have anything as good as that. It was great. And as I was eating it, she gave me a little present, was a little board and a little rolling pin and a dollop of dough. So I was going to be making tortillas today too. And I did. It was quite fun. After that, I loved to go over to Mamacita's house, and we sat down at that table, and I really liked to help her a lot. I helped her every day practically. I would shell peas or snap beans, or my other big job was I would take a big pot of raw pinto beans, frijoles we call them, and I would go through it and take out all the little debris, rocks, that kind of stuff, and put it in a bowl so that it would be ready for her to cook later that day. Those were great times because I spent a lot of time asking her questions. I would ask her what her life was like before I knew her. And she would tell me about her childhood. She would tell me about her young womanhood. She told me her immigration story and how she came to Oakland. those were great times, and I really learned quite a bit of family history that way. Well, before I knew it, it was 1951, and I had another little sister. Her name was Celeste. And now that meant that there were 3 girls and mom and dad. So my parents bought a house in West Oakland. Further down, my Mamacita and Papacito's house was on the edge of downtown Oakland. This house was further down into West Oakland. Well, also, it was a time I was 6 years old, so it was time for me to go to school. And my sister Tina was 5, and she was going to be in kindergarten. But before we went to school, my parents said, "Wait a minute, we want to tell you something." Sometimes people will tell you, they will talk to you, and they'll say, "What are you?" Or they'll say, "Where do you come from?" Or just different things like that. So we want to tell you something. We want to say, when people say, "Where are you?" You should tell them, "I am Mexican American." Don't say Spanish. You are not Spanish. You are Mexican American. Do you understand? Yes. Okay. And off we went to school. Well, it so happened that very first day in first grade, the first thing that happened after the teacher introduced herself was the custodian came in, and he was adjusting all of the tables, the heights, to make sure that it was appropriate for each of us. And when he came to my desk, he said, "Oh, I like your braids," because I had a traditional long braids down to my waist. I said, "Oh, thank you." And then he was kind of finished. And then as he got up, he said, "Well, what are you?" "Oh, I am Mexican American." And he said, "Oh no, you're too nice for that. You aren't like them." And off he went. And I went, "Whoa, that was interesting." So I remember that even to this day. And so time passed, and I was in the early 50s or late 50s. My father became, civil rights was becoming a very important thing. We were all aware of it in our community, and especially my dad. He was an activist, and he joined this organization called a community organization called the CSO, Community Service Organization. They were an organization that was organized to help Mexican American citizens, people, and bring them together and perhaps work on different issues. The first thing that they wanted to do, though, was to start a voter registration drive. And my father was the chairperson. Well, the table came into play once more because being downtown, near downtown, that was the perfect place. Mamacita's and Papacito's house was the perfect place to have meetings. And there wasn't that many people on the committee. So they all came down there, and they would sit around the table and discuss how they were going to do this. And at the very beginning, a young Cesar Chavez came up from the valley because he had had a lot of experience organizing and doing voter registration. He stayed at my grandparents' house for about a week, and that's how they got their start with the voter registration. Now, my father really was very adamant that his daughters would know about civil rights and the whole issue, and he wanted us to be part of his work. What he did was, we were only like 10 or 9 years old at that time. I and my sister Tina, we were the older ones. He would go every single Saturday to the Housewives Market in downtown Oakland. This market was the only market that served West Oakland. Otherwise, you had to go way far away to other parts of town. Saturday was market day. Everybody came to Housewives Market on Saturday. And right to go in, there was some great big, to me, they were big, double doors, and they opened them wide, and you'd see people going in and out carrying big baskets and bags of clothes, of different kinds of gardening things or the groceries for the day and the week. Well, My dad positioned us on one side, my sister Tina and myself, and then he and his registration papers would sit on the other side. And we had a job. What was our job? When people came out of that door, we were to say, "Have you registered to vote?" And people would go, little kids are asking us that. And we would, because we'd be there for a long time, we'd even make up things. We'd say, "Vote, vote, vote. Have you registered to vote?" Or I would make up little signs like this, wave it around, and we got their attention all right. And Dad was great. He had the gift of gab. He would see that person and they'd look over and he'd have them in his clutches and have them registered before you know it. But guys were very interesting to me because they were little kids. And then we would point to Dad and they would, "Hey, aren't you a boxer?" My dad was kind of a minor person that people knew because before we were born, he was a boxer and a Golden Gloves champion. And also he had a boys club, for a while, training people, young men from the community in boxing, and went to gyms there. So some people kind of knew. And I remember one guy was saying, "Hey, is that baby Tarzan?" And he goes, "Oh my God, yeah, but that's a long time ago." So he was able to do a lot of registering. In fact, that particular drive registered over 3,000 people during their time. So that was very impressive. Well, that's the table. And the table kept coming up in my life because we would spend a lot of time there at my grandmother's house. It was a place of greeting. Everybody would come in. There'd be neighbors also, and we would have tamale feasts and enchiladas and lots of fun together and work on civil rights activities. So right now, the table first, my parents, because of urban renewal, the city bought their house and they moved into a little apartment and the table didn't fit in there. So then I was volunteering. I was then already a grown person and had my own place, and I received that table and I took out the leaves because I didn't need the great big table. And there it is today. I'm looking right at it in my little cottage. It really reminds me of my family. My parents have died, my grandparents have died, my aunts and uncles. And so this is really important to remind me. And I think that table must be around 100 years old by now. I count all the ages of everybody. Thank you for listening to my story.
Well, what an honor it is to have you tell the story. And I think for someone to sit at your Mamacita's table and to be able to tell their stories as well. What a wonderful idea.
The Housewives Market is still there in the community.
Wow.
And I used to rent a spot right above that area. And it's a very nice community there now that's holding together real beautifully. Are you still living in Oakland?
I do. I've lived in Oakland all my life, but I now live in the Diamond District of Oakland. But I do go down there because there's and then there's Swan's Market right across too, and that still has the same. This pork company is right there, and they were one of the very first people that were in Housewives Market, and now
it's a beautiful old Oakland. Yeah,
yes.
I'm up in Sonoma County now, but I lived in Oakland for 40 years. So just good to hear the story. Thank you for that story. It's just so good to hear the real stories.
Yes.
Thanks.
Well, memories of Oakland, memories of childhood, and more memories coming up now from Doris Hand. After the Civil War, the United States had several army forts throughout the West, manned by officers and soldiers with their families. The army protected the railroad from bandits and the settlers from the Indians. We'll go back in time as we hear the story of one officer's wife, told in her own words by Doris Hand.
Riding on that train for several days, I was tired, but so excited. I was rejoining my husband and children. My husband, the colonel, I always call him that, and the children, Anna 11, James and Charlie 8 and 9. After the Civil War, my husband was stationed at various forts throughout the West, and we accompanied him. At our last post in Texas, the conditions were so harsh, I became extremely ill. When I could travel, my husband sent me back east to recuperate with my family. And he took the children to the next post in Nevada. And now I'm going back to be with them. I just can't wait. The conductor came through the car calling, Halleck Station, Nevada, Halleck Station, Nevada. That's my stop. I gathered my things, and as I exited the train, I saw him over there on the other edge of the platform, the colonel. When he spied me, he hurried over. How are you, Emma? A bit tired, but so glad to be back. How are the children? What's the fort like? How are our quarters? Whoa, one question at a time. The children are fine. In fact, they're waiting for us. The fort is small, and we have to travel a little further to the edge of the Humboldt Mountains. I've brought the ambulance to make it easier for you. Now, the ambulance was merely a wagon with a big canvas top and two benches on either side for the wounded or whatever, and it's pulled by a team of mules. The colonel stowed my luggage, and then he helped me climb aboard. And I sat on one side and he sat on the other. Suddenly, the wagon took off in a lurch. I got to start a look on my face. Emma, that's okay. The mules always take off at a gallop here. I settled down. You haven't told me about our quarters. That's a surprise for you. You have to wait till we arrive. Well, I knew it was useless to try and impress the colonel to tell me. So I just sat there and wondered. Our last quarters, I don't know if you want to call them that, actually was one large room, sandbags for walls, a canvas for the roof, and sand blew in, but it was the bugs. The bugs were everywhere. You picked them out of your food. You brushed them off your clothes. You shook out your bedding before you went to bed, or you'd have bugs with you. And in the morning, you just better check your shoes or boots to see if there were bugs inside, or perhaps even a scorpion. I hope this place is better. Suddenly the wagon stopped, and the colonel stepped down, then he helped me down, but he faced me toward the wagon. Close your eyes, Emma. This is your surprise. I closed my eyes, and he swooped me off my feet. He carried me. I could tell we were going up a step, and then we paused, a creak as the door opened. We stepped inside, and I could feel that his boots were hitting wood. He put me down. You can open your eyes now. I opened my eyes, and there, next to the colonel, was a young Chinese man. Meet Lin Ho. He's going to be your cook and help you with the household chores. Lin Ho gave a slight bow and then disappeared. Lin Ho has been wonderful with the children, and he basically doesn't speak any English, but he understands everything. It was getting toward dusk, and so the colonel picked up a kerosene lamp and escorted me toward the back of the house. We were in a hallway, and on either side there were two rooms. He opened the back door, and we walked onto a huge porch across the whole back. It was enclosed. A table was set for dinner, and there the children were waiting. They ran over and hugged me. I made dinner for us with Lin Ho, Anna said. She was so proud about that. We sat down and the colonel ordered Lin Ho to bring the meal on. And we ate and chatted till taps blew and we retired to bed. You see, in the Army, everything's governed by the bugle. You go to bed with taps, you wake up to revelry, and I woke up that next morning at 6:30. After the colonel had finished breakfast and the children, he went off to his task. The children went to their lessons and chores. And I took a cup of coffee out to the front of the house. I wanted to see what the surroundings looked like. As I sipped my coffee, I could see the Humboldt Mountains. And across the fort, all the buildings were adobe, as was our house. Oh, this was so much better than Texas. Well, anyhow, the bugle did everything, and I had to adjust to this sound of the bugle. The bugle would sound assembly for the arrival of a mail wagon or a supply wagon. It would sound assembly for sick call. It also sounded assembly if there was some news or notice that had to be given to the whole fort. I settled into life with the bugle. Well, it was perhaps 6 weeks or maybe a couple months when the bugle sounded assembly. And everybody came out. The commanding officer announced that he had been reassigned to Washington and my husband, the colonel, would be the acting commanding officer. Now we would be entitled to move into better quarters. The quarters are assigned according to rank. The commanding officer gets the best. We had the second best. Junior officers get only 1 or 2 rooms. After we discussed the matter, I said, I'm just settled. And the colonel said, well, if we get another commanding officer and I have to step back, he'll make us move back to these quarters. So we both decided to stay. Now that he was commanding officer, though, that he wanted to make things more accommodating for travelers from San Francisco. You see, the fort had the responsibility to offer hospitality. After several days on the train, I knew what that was like. And the ride from San Francisco to Halleck Station would be a really long ride, and they needed a rest. So the colonel decided to take 3 of the 4 hospital bed frames, which were always never used except maybe 1, and give them to the 3 top officers. We received 1, and the next 2 junior officers received the other 2. I fixed a guest room. And things went on. We had a few travelers and they so appreciated this rest stop. Maybe it was 2 more months and the telegraph sent word that the inspector general from the Army was coming to inspect our fort. The bugle sounded assembly and my husband announced this to the whole fort. And he advised the various department heads that they needed to have everything in perfect condition. You see, every commanding officer dreaded the arrival of this inspector general. He was known as a spit and polish officer who went by the book. Well, I was going to be the hostess of hospitality. I hung muslin curtains in the guest room. The children and I fixed a new mattress, which was basically a sack with fresh hay and straw, and I put out my best linens. The day of the general's arrival, the colonel went to the train and met him. And Lin Ho and I had prepared the best meal we could. When we sat down, I found the general to be very personable and charming, and we visited and chatted. The first day of inspection was the quartermaster's section, and it passed with flying colors. The next day was the hospital, and everything was fine until the question of 3 missing bed frames came up. My husband politely explained that they would be returned immediately, but they were for hospitality for travelers from San Francisco. My husband shared with me. The general got a stern look on his face and he exclaimed, Government property is not to be expropriated for private use. Return them immediately. A soldier was dispatched to our house, and he found the bed, threw the bedding in the corner, dismantled the frame, and carried it back to the hospital. Anna was standing there watching this. And after the soldier left, she asked me, "Mother, where shall I make the general's bed?" I took a deep breath. "On the floor." "On the floor, Mother?" "Yes, on the floor." Now, even at 11, Anna knew Army protocol. You did not put a general on the floor. But I gave her no explanation. So that night, the general slept on the floor. The next morning, he was as personable and charming as ever. And I really enjoyed his friendship and sharing. And I suggested that we exchange addresses and continue to keep in touch by correspondence. And he agreed. And we did. Well, the colonel took him to the train, and the bed was still in the room when the colonel returned. He walked past the room and he called me, "Emma, is this what I think it is? Did the general sleep on the floor?" "Yes, the general slept on the floor." "You put the general on the floor?" "I don't know what you expected me to do. I'm no magician. I couldn't manufacture a bed frame out of thin air." The colonel knew that it was useless to try and take the topic further because I would stand my ground. Well, as hard as he tried, the colonel tried to keep this information from leaking out. But you know how that is. Those things escape, and it did. And we didn't know how far it had escaped until a young junior officer was assigned a few months later. And we had our usual reception line so he could meet everybody in the fort. And when he came to me, I did a little curtsy. And he looked at me and took my hand. And he said, "Don't curtsy to me, ma'am. I just want to shake the hand of the lady who had the courage to put that pompous General Jones on the floor." Well, sir, it really wasn't courage, maybe a little bit, but I felt that it was a teaching moment and Washington needed to learn the harsh conditions out here in the West. And you need to know that, to the general's credit, as far as his personality and character, he gave me his address even after that. And we've been in correspondence and really have a kind of friendship. And that's the story of Following the Bugle. I created the character of Emma from a composite of information that I read in the diaries of women who were officers' wives in the West. And Emma's character really was the main amount of information I'd seen in these diaries. Thank you.
Wonderful memories of hard life and hard beds and maybe a hard mattress. Thank you, Doris. Well, in March this year, Betsy Mosier won the Story Slam at the Teha Storytelling Festival, a program she almost didn't enter. And what was the prize? My prize, she said, a felt jester's hat that I proudly wore for the rest of the day. Well, when asked why storytelling, Betsy answered, MTV. We have TV shows and movies that tell us what the story looks like. And then MTV began telling us what the songs look like. And I became really concerned that we were losing touch with our imaginations. But storytelling gives us the opportunity to let our creative imagination soar. Well, tonight, Betsy tells an original, partly true story from her childhood about bravery, friendship, and true love. Betsy.
A girl's not likely to forget her first love. I know I never did. It was Mother's Day weekend, 1956, and I was 5 years old. Mom and Dad had piled my brothers and me in the back seat of our old Studebaker wagon, and we drove south to Grandma Mary and Grandpa Mansell's farm in Indiana. And that farm, Well, it was and still is my favorite place in the whole wide world. The smell of the barnyard, the summer rainstorms, the bonfires in the fall, and Grandma Mary's house. Well, it always smelled like fresh baked pie and Grandpa Mansel's pipe tobacco. It's funny how scents stay with you for your whole life. Well, as soon as we arrived and tumbled out of the car, it was hugs and kisses and my, how you've grown. And then the grown-ups went up on the porch to talk about all the latest news. And my brothers and I, we did what we always did. We made the rounds of the barnyard. Well, we found new kittens and chicks and piglets and a couple of knobby-kneed new little calves out in the pasture. And then we did what we always did. We tried to catch ourselves a barn cat, but they are fast and wary creatures. With that, my brothers went and begged Grandma Mary for some old mason jars and headed down to the creek to catch tadpoles. But me, I wandered into the barn, and it was dark and dusty and quiet like a church without people in it. And I saw against the wall on Grandpa Mansel's workbench was a box with a heat lamp clamped onto it. And so I tiptoed over and I stretched up as high as I could be. And I looked down over the edge of that box. And there, nestled in the straw, was an egg. It was light tan with brown spots. And as I watched, it began to rock slightly back and forth, and I could hear a tap, tap, tapping on the inside as whatever it was in was trying to get out. And as I watched in wonder and in awe, the cracks began to get longer, and the chips that flew out began to get a little bigger. And I watched and I watched and I so wanted to help, but I knew what Grandma Mary would do. She'd tan my hide if I helped that little thing get born, because anything in the farm has to get born by itself. Well, as I watched, finally the cracks split the egg, and I was really surprised. I expected a little chick. That's what I was hoping for, but it wasn't. It was a poult. A baby turkey. And I knew it was one of my grandfather Mansel's prized bourbon red turkeys. Well, I looked at that little turkey right in the eye, and it looked up at me and cheeped, and that was it. Love at first sight. Well, I waited till his feathers dried a little and he got his feet underneath him, and I gently scooped him up and looked him in the eye, and I named him Hank. Why Hank? Well, Henry just seemed too formal for anything that little. Well, as soon as he was steady on his feet, I took him to the farmhouse, and I went in the door and the screen slammed behind me, and Grandpa Mansell, he lowered his newspaper, and I said, Grandpa, look what I've got. Look what I've got. Can I keep him? And Grandpa Mansell, why, he winked at me, and he was about to say yes, I'm pretty sure, when Grandma Mary came out of the kitchen wearing her making supper apron. She pointed her wooden spoon at me and said, "It is never a good idea to be on the first name basis with Sunday supper." And with that, moments later, my mother came out of the bedroom. She looked at me, she looked at Hank, and her face went white as the clean sheets hanging on Grandma Mary's clotheslines. You see, my mom, she was scared of birds, any kind of birds. And that's pretty odd, considering she was a farm girl and all herself. But I think maybe it was seeing one too many chickens with its head cut off, Sunday supper and all. Get that thing out of here, she ordered. And so I turned on my heels, and with Hank in my hands, I went back to the barn. By now, my brothers were interested, and they followed me out there. And as soon as they saw Hank, they said, "He's scrawny. He's ugly." And that was about the sum total of their interest. But moments later, my Grandma Mary followed me out to the barn, and she helped me find a new clean box and we filled it with straw and hay and pine shavings for Hank. You know, you can't put him in those old used box from the chickens, because chickens, they got diseases that'll kill a baby poult in no time. Well, we settled all the fur, the straw and the hay in there. And then we put in a bowl for water and a bowl for turkey chow. And I gently set Hank in his new house while Grandma Mary clamped on that heat lamp. You know, you got to keep those new babies warm while their feathers are growing in. And first thing that silly turkey did, why, he stepped in his water bowl and spilled it. Well, I set it to rights, filled it with water, and gave him some more dry straw. And that was it. That's how Hank and I became a team. Now, Grandma Mary, she wasn't too keen on our having a relationship because, well, Hank was a boy. Hank was a tom turkey. And you know, they grow those wicked looking spurs on the back of their legs. They use them for fighting other toms. But by now it was too late. Hank and I, we were a team. Now, there's a couple things you might want to know about turkeys. People tell you they're stupid, but they're not. They're downright intelligent. At least those barnyard turkeys are. Maybe those big white turkeys they breed for Thanksgiving aren't so bright, but not the turkeys I know. Well, not only are they smart, they're sociable, they're friendly, and they've got some God-given talents. And one, as a defense, they eat. They eat a lot, they eat it fast, and then they grow and grow and grow. Because what's the point of getting born just to get eaten by something bigger than you in the barnyard? Well, Hank and I, well, we were together that whole week, and I just barely managed to talk Mom and Dad and Grandma and Grandpa into letting me sleep in the barn. I've set up a pile of hay and I covered it with some of the old quilts, and I put Hank's box right next to me with the light clipped onto it. And even the farm dogs slept out there with us. Well, we did try to catch ourselves a barn cat to sleep out there, but they are fast and wary creatures. My brothers were going to bunk out there with me until they realized that the only TV at Grandma's house was actually in Grandma's house. But all week long, I slept in the barn with Hank in his box next to me. And in the morning, the crowing of the roosters would wake me up, and I would stretch and yawn, and I'd watch those dust motes float down through the air. And moments later, Hank would be peeping and cheeping in his box wide awake. I'd give him some fresh water and fresh turkey chow and fresh straw if he needed it. And then I'd run to the house for some of Grandma Mary's buttermilk pancakes. And if I was the first one there, I might get that last little sliver of blueberry pie left over from supper the night before. Well, after breakfast, it was time for chores. And Hank and I, well, we went along with Grandpa Mansell. Either Hank was in my arms or in my pocket or following behind me. Why, we would milk and feed the cows, we slopped the pigs, we collected all the chicken eggs, and Hank would follow right close on my heels, because there's no point in those getting tromped by the hooves or snuffled by the snouts in the barnyard. Well, that week was wonderful. After chores every day, we were free to explore and play, and we chased each other, and it was wonderful. But come Sunday, Mom said it was time to go home. I cried. You know I did. I cried because I didn't want to leave Hank, and I gave him a hug, and I told him I loved him and not to forget me. And then I made Grandma Mary promise that Hank would not be on the Thanksgiving menu. Well, Grandma Mary had a softer heart for me than she did for Hank, but she promised. Well, what with all the end of the school year things going on, it was mid-June before we got back to the farm. But as soon as we pulled in, here came Hank, strutting through the barnyard, and considerably bigger than he'd been when we'd left weeks before. But he remembered me. It was hugs and kisses and chasing each other all around. It was like I'd never left. It was wonderful that summer. It was just about as perfect as a summer could be, because I was got to go to the farm as often as we could. And we would play, we would do chores. That's the summer I learned to play checkers with Grandpa Mansell. And I think mostly he let me win. And Grandma Mary taught me to sew doll clothes. We shucked the corn, we shelled the peas. It was wonderful. But at the end of summer, it was time to go home again. It was time to go home and start first grade. And I hugged Frank, I hugged Hank again and told him not to forget me and told him I loved him. Well, we got back to the farm as often as we could that year. It was never as often as I would have liked, but every time my mom drove into that yard, why, here would come Hank. He never forgot me. We picked up right where we left. Well, that year just flew by, even though I missed Hank terribly. But come summer, I was right back at the farm. My brothers, they went off to Boy Scout camp for 3 weeks, and me, I got to go to the farm. And that was the summer that Grandpa Mansell set up his old army cot in the barn for me. And by now, Hank was big. He was strong. He didn't need to sleep in a box anymore. Why, he'd just plop right down next to me in a bed of straw, tuck his head under his wing and fall asleep. Hank and me and the dogs, but none of the barn cats. And that was the summer that I learned that Hank loved grapes. He loved grapes. If I had a pocket full of grapes, why, Hank was stuck to me like my shadow. But that was also an odd year. It was hot and it was dry, and it was hotter and drier than anybody could remember. And I could see worry sitting on Grandpa Mansell's shoulders, worrying about the corn and about the hay and about the animals. But Grandma Mary, she still made the best fruit pies in all of Indiana, and there was enough water in the creek to cool our feet. Well, that summer just flew by. And at the end of the summer, I had to say goodbye to Hank again. And I made Grandma Mary promise that Hank would not be on this Thanksgiving menu either. Well, come November, we were heading back to the farm for Thanksgiving week. But it was cold. It was really cold that November, and the snow had come early. I mean, nothing was normal that year, but we got to the farm and I knew there was no point. It was much too cold and the grownups were never going to let me sleep outside. But each night after playing with Hank and playing on the farm, why, I'd go into the barn and I'd make Hank a nest of straw, and I'd make sure he had his bowl of water and his bowl of turkey chow. And at night, I'd tell him good night. I'd see him in the morning and I'd close the barn door tight. Well, Thanksgiving morning dawned and I could not stay in bed. The light coming in through the window was so bright. And when I looked out, we had snow, a fresh snowfall, and I could hardly wait to see what Hank was going to make of that. So I slipped on my jeans and a sweater, my jacket, a cap, and by the back door in the kitchen, why, I slipped on my snow boots and went down the stairs. Well, if I'd been looking in front of me instead of behind me, I might have seen trouble coming before trouble found me. But I was walking backwards, watching my footprints in the snow, and I got to the barn. I unlatched it and I started to pull the handle back, opening the barn door, when I heard a growl. And I stood there with my hand clasped on the door handle, and I looked down the side of the barn, and there was a bobcat creeping along the side of the barn. Now, normally, a bobcat would never come into a farmyard. I think he was lured by the smell of the chickens, but it saw me. It crouched and it was ready to pounce, I think, when Grandma Mary came out of the kitchen. She was standing on the top step and she saw me. And then she saw the bobcat and she screamed. And down those stairs she came in her making breakfast apron and her house slippers. And I was standing there with that door handle clasped in my hand. Grandma Mary screamed and started off across the snowy yard. But that bobcat, that bobcat spun around. Now, normally with all that commotion, a bobcat would hightail it back to the woods, but this year, no, nothing was normal, and not that bobcat for sure. It turned and it sprung and started racing towards Grandma Mary. I screamed, but as I stood there, a flash of red and brown feathers came streaking out of the barn, past me and straight to Grandma Mary. Why, that was Hank, and he took on that bobcat with his wings and his beak, his feet, and those deadly spurs. And that bobcat, why, it never knew what hit him. Well, that afternoon at Thanksgiving dinner, there were tearful prayers of thanksgiving. Thanksgiving, thank you prayers for divine and earthly interventions. And that year, Hank and Grandma and I, why, we all got our picture in the paper with a story about how a bourbon red saved his family. Well, you know, I took that piece of that newspaper back to school and I showed all my friends who never believed that I really had a pet turkey. I had the bravest pet turkey ever. Well, I was 17 when the call came, that call I'd been dreading. That call that told me that Hank was gone. He was 12 years and 4 months old, which for a turkey is a long, long life. But since that Thanksgiving when Hank had saved Grandma and me, why, he'd never had to worry about being on any Thanksgiving menu. He never had to worry about anything at all. He always had fresh straw, clean water, and a full bowl of turkey chow and grapes when they were in season. Well, if you go out to Grandma Mary's farm now, you'll see that he's buried underneath her apple tree at the edge of the farmyard with a plaque that reads, "Here lies Hank, protector extraordinaire, friend to all." And that's the story of Hank and me.
Thank you, Betsy. What a wonderful story. And I'm so glad he didn't end up on anybody's Thanksgiving table or any other table at all. Well, to wrap up, we've had a wonderful evening. And to wrap up, I'm handing over the meeting to Marianne and Betsy for just to say thank you and to let us know what is coming up in the future.
Marian?
Okay, thank you, Cynthia.
There we go.
So we really appreciate everybody came, and Delta Word Weavers, there you are. That's how to spell it. We're under the Storytelling Association website. So go there and then go to Story Swaps. You can find all the swaps under Storytelling Association and look up the swaps to see when we meet. So my group will not meet in December, but we'll assemble again in January. January, February, all the rest of the month, we meet on the second Sundays at 2 o'clock. Coming up, you have 4 or 5 more celebrations you can still go to within the next few days. Imagine that. So just put everything else aside because the stories that were wonderful tonight and they will continue. Friday night is let me type that. Well, I have it typed. Okay, in the chat. There it goes. If you type Inland Valley Storytellers, they're on tomorrow night. But for them, they're not on the SAC website. This is their own, they're from this Southern California. So you need to type in, they have a website. So type in their website and find out the details and the links for their celebration tomorrow night. And then Saturday, 3:30, Ed Lewis is here. So his Sacramento Storytelling Guild plus Storytellers of San Diego, 3:30 on Saturday, 7 o'clock on Saturday, South Bay Storytellers and Listeners. And they have the way they linked up with Southern California to invite Michael McCarty, a fabulous teller who just fills up the room and is a wonderful teller. He's their featured teller for Saturday night at 7. On Sunday is, you get that right. Yeah, on Sunday at 3 o'clock is Community Storytellers from Southern California and the Mother Lode Storytelling Guild. They are joining together for 3 o'clock on Sunday. So all those others except the Inland Valley Storytellers can be found on Storytelling Association of California. And I typed in the website. It's on the chat. So go there to find some more stories. And you do need to register just like you did tonight, but it's new numbers for everybody. On in Southern California with your group.
Well, I am lucky to be a member of the South Coast Storytellers Guild. I've been a member for a number of years, a very, very nurturing, wonderful group that dedicates itself to bringing up new storytellers. And we meet the third Thursday of every month. Of course, we're doing Zoom meetings like everybody else. And you can find information on our brand new website, which is Storytellers Guild, South Coast StorytellersGuild.org. And I would just like to give a shout out to Marian Ferrante. She attended one of our web meetings. We started talking about Tellabration and that little light bulb went on over her head. And she said, why don't we team up? And not only did we team up, but under her direction, she has paired up a number of Southern California and Northern California guilds to have joint Tellabrations, something, just a brand new idea, and hopefully one which will continue long after we go back to whatever normal is. So thank you, Marian. Thank you to SAC for hosting us. This was an amazing evening. And please, for more information about storytelling in California, look up is it StorySac? Is that right, Ed? StorySac.org. And
Can I make an announcement?
Please.
So we didn't do it this month, but we will have our third genre storytelling event in December. And the theme is Sacred Inspirational Story. So we have 3 groups that have
We lost your sound.
Wait.
Oh, wait, I have? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so the genre storytelling starts again in December. The theme is Sacred Inspirational Stories. And we have 3 groups that have nominated people: South Bay, Storytellers of San Diego, and Sacramento Storytellers Guild. So if either of your groups have a storyteller that you would like to nominate, be one of our 6 or 7 tellers, please send that information to me. Any swap group in California can nominate one person from their organization. You need to be a member of SAC and also part of your storytelling group. Yeah. Apply for that.
That's the 3rd Wednesday in December.
Yeah, that'll be December 16th.
Yes.
At 7 o'clock at night.
And the Stories in Living Color is also a big SAC event. They just had it last night. So now you have to wait till December, the 2nd Tuesday. And this is where they pair up tellers of different races and they work together ahead of time and they pair up. They each tell a story that's, I'll say, related by topic on discrimination or race relations. And the evening also has some conversation, they with each other and some interaction with the audience, I believe. So those are very dynamic, and that is the 2nd Tuesday of December. All of that, you sign up on storysac.org. I wrote it down.
Storysac.org.
There it is. Shags put it in recently, stories.org. So I was right. Okay, so come back to SAC and all the stories. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Cynthia, for being a wonderful, wonderful MC for our program.
Yes.
Well,
Way to go,
Yes,
Cynthia.
the storytellers
Fantastic.
made the evening
Round
a
of applause.
wonderful opportunity to hear stories from other people, from other clubs, and it's just so great. So I think we've had a great evening, and to all of our storytellers, thank you, and please carry on telling the stories.
thank you. Good night, folks.
Good night.
Oh,
Thank
we
you.
should,
Cynthia.